Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, I hope you're well, inshallah. In this episode, inshallah, we're going to be going over science and the philosophy of science and just going over some of the limitations of the scientific method. Now, why is it important that we go over what science is and the scientific method? Well, simply because there's this idea that's been put out there these days that science is the only way to truth. You know, you guys, you believe in God, you believe in the Quran, you know, you guys are backwards, you know, we have science today. You know, this is the sort of narrative that's been put out there. So it's important to put things into perspective and put things into their desired places, if you like, because it's important to point out, you know, and clarify the narrative, because, you know, the truth of the matter is that science isn't the only way to truth, you know, and Islam and the Quran isn't backwards. So what we're going to do in this episode, inshallah, is we're going to break down what science is. Now, when we look at the scientific method, let's ask the question first, right? What is science? This is a very important question. I mean, we all do science, or scientists do science, but what is science? I mean, Bertrand Russell, on page 8 of his book, Religion and Science, he states, an attempt to discover, by means of observation and reasoning based upon it, particular facts about the world. Now, what does he mean here? I mean, let's look at his statement. What he's basically saying is that science is a method, right, which attempts to discover facts about the physical world, the physical reality around us, by means of observation, through observation, using observation, right? Now, what this tells us is straight away is that the scientific method is limited to what's observable. So it has no claim on metaphysical realities, such as questions about morality or ethics. You know, science cannot measure love in a test tube. And then he goes on to say, and reasoning based upon it, right? So this basically sums up what the scientific method is. It's a method which is limited, has a scope, and is limited to what's observable, and it tries to discover facts about this physical reality through observation and reasoning. Now, the official epistemology of science is empiricism, right? And this is probably one of the most key limiting factors of the scientific method. Now, what is empiricism? As we discussed before, empiricism basically is a notion that all knowledge is attainable via the senses. Only through the senses, through observation, through touch, smell, sight, taste, and all of these physical senses. Now, empiricism isn't a sure way to truth. I mean, it has its limitations and issues. I mean, let's take the example of Elliot Sober's white cat. He gives a really beautiful little example of a white cat which starts walking towards a snowstorm, and the snowstorm, being the backdrop, is also white. So as the cat draws nearer to the snowstorm, it becomes invisible to sight. So you cannot observe it directly anymore. So now at this point, empiricists will have to conclude that the cat no longer exists because you can't observe it. Now here, you know, you will get some empiricists that say, you know, okay, it's not only about direct observations, you know, it's also about indirect observation. Some will maintain that it's about direct observation. So this is a dilemma that scientists face, and they will continue to face. I mean, because if you say it's not only about direct observation, then you're opening up the door to metaphysical realities, to such questions such as, does God exist? Another limiting factor of the scientific method is bound by time, right? I mean, experimentation, which is a key part of the scientific method, can only be conducted in the present. You can't go into the future and conduct experiments, nor can you go into the past and conduct experiments. Now, the scientific method uses inductive reasoning to come to its conclusions, right? And the inductive method itself is limited. I mean, Samir Akasha clearly states this in his book, The Philosophy of Science, an Introduction to the Philosophy of Science. He states, in effect, scientists use induction whenever they go from limited data to a more general conclusion, which they do all the time. Now, this clearly shows if science is based on induction and it relies heavily on the inductive method of reasoning, then there's some issues here as well, because induction itself cannot give you 100% truth. You can probably have 97% truth, 98% truth, even 99% truth in some cases. But you cannot ever guarantee 100% absolute truth. And this is a problem. I mean, I'll give you a simple example. Let's say you observed 1,000 pigeons, and you observed them all to be grey, right? And therefore, you go from the specific set of data that you've just observed, and then you formulate a more general conclusion, and you say, all pigeons in the UK are grey, or the next pigeon will be grey too, or the next 10 pigeons will be grey. Do you see? Either way, what's happening is that you're inducing the fact that, or you're inducing the conclusion that of what has not been observed so far, right? So you're going from a limited set of specific data to a more general conclusion, which isn't guaranteed. So it can't give you 100% truth. Now, in short, those were some of the limiting factors of the scientific method, you know, and we don't have to go too deep into it, but the point is what we can clearly start to see is that science has its limitation. It has a scope which it can't transgress, or it can't go beyond, right? So when it comes to the question of God, or does God exist, or the proof of God, science can't directly prove or disprove the existence of God. Anyone that claims that science could do this is actually, it's a fallacy. You know, it doesn't hold any weight, because we know the scientific method itself is limited, it has a scope, and it can't go beyond the observable physical world, right? And God, we know, is a metaphysical reality. You can't observe God physically. He's beyond the physical world. You know, he's not a part of this physical reality. So inshallah, the next time someone comes to you, brothers and sisters, even if it's a university professor and he says to you, you know, science is the only way to truth, it's, you know, I can't believe you believe in religion and all of that, you know. So now what we can do is we can say, hold on a minute, you know, do you know what science is and the limitations of the scientific method? It's a good method, don't get me wrong. It's a good method when it's applied within its scope. It's a fantastic method, and we've seen some fantastic discoveries, but it has a scope and is limited, and it's a point that we can get across very, very easily to individuals now, inshallah. In the next episode, inshallah, we're going to be going over the link between Islam and science. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be breaking down this narrative that, you know, Islam is against science. You know, we're going to be showing that Islam and the Quran encourages you to go out and observe the physical world. In other words, to go out and do science. So inshallah, stay tuned for the next episode. I hope you've benefited from this, inshallah. Please share the video. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.